Hi, American history students. Well, I have been telling you since Christmas break, when we got back, we were going to talk about World War II. It's one of my favorites, and I know it's some of yours too. So, before we get into our notes, I want to talk about just a few things that you see right here. This is a replica of a helmet from World War II. Now, you'll notice that they're a little bit different than what we saw in World War I. And actually, this is something I just learned a couple of weeks ago. You're always learning new things in history. But the football helmet was starting to be refurbished, and they were starting to use something that looked like this. And so the military saw that that was working well for football, so they decided to use the same thing for World War II. Remember that World War I helmets were more flat. They didn't stay on your head very well. They didn't protect you very well. So we're starting to see a little bit better material. Is it going to protect you from a direct bullet shot? No, but it would help you with fragments that kind of glance off. And it stays on your head a lot better. You're starting to see the same kind of stuff that you saw in football helmets, kind of protected your head a little bit so you weren't directly on the helmet itself, and it went around the chin strap as well. Now, a couple of things about the helmet. First of all, you'll notice that they started using the four different symbols from a card game, right? And the reason for that is the higher ups said that we need a way to be able to organize our men quickly, especially on D Day. As we're dropping paratroopers, we need to be able to not have to ask them or say, okay, we need all these guys over here, the 82nd over here, or the whatever. We could just look at their helmet and say, you go over here. And so that's why they started using those four symbols. And I won't go into all the detail, but if you'll look, there's a whole thing on YouTube about like what these different things mean, what job you have in that particular group, and all that fun stuff. So kind of neat. Now, if you've seen some of our footage of Band of Brothers already, or you've seen World War II movies, you've noticed sometimes they have things in their helmet inside the netting. One of the things they might have carried was this. This is actually bandages in case you were wounded. This is actually from Normandy, believe it or not. And obviously, you want to keep it up here, keep it out of the water if you end up in wet or slough or something like that. They also carried their cigarettes in here. We kind of addicted a whole generation of men to smoking because they got little kits when they were overseas in World War II. And one of the things we put in their kits was a pack of cigarettes. And when you're bored and you're sitting in a foxhole, it's one of the things that they did. We didn't understand at the time that it caused lung cancer, but it was something for them to do. So, okay. So we talked a little bit about this helmet. This is actually, a real paratrooper's hat from World War II. And you can tell by the, insignia there that it's a paratrooper. This was obviously something that they wore when they weren't going into battle. It was more of their dress attire. Another thing to kind of be watching for in our first episode of Band of Brothers is that paratroopers got their jump wings. Let's see if I can get this a little closer here. Very important. That's a sign that they had 5 jumps, and it included a night jump as well. Remember, we don't have night capability like we do nowadays. So that was a rather unique experience. But they were very proud to get those jump wings. So be watching for that in this episode. Okay, I'll show you some more stuff as we get into part 2. But let's get into our notes about World War II. Okay, why do we study World War II? Well, let's be real specific here. It is the single largest event in human history ever. There have never been this many countries, this much territory involved in one war. Now, for the United States, we fought in the war from 1941 to 1945. But if you remember from world history, this war has been going on for a while in Europe. It's been going on for a while in Asia as well. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. 50 million people dead. We had a horrendous number of casualties in World War II, but if you compare that to the Soviet Union or even Germany, Poland, our numbers are small in comparison. So sad. It included 5 different continents because, of course, we're all connected with allies, and so it pulls us all into the war. As I said, U.S. casualties were horrendous, 450,000 people dead. But in comparison to the Soviets, 20 million battle deaths. And that just includes battle deaths. That doesn't even include the millions of civilians that were killed as well. It's also important because it also affects the future of history. It is the beginning of the Cold War because we start having problems between us and the Soviet Union. This is also where we start to label countries as third world countries that don't have the power that a country like England might have or the United States. So, where did the war start? It actually started in 1935 with Italy. People forget about Italy. Italy first invades Ethiopia in Africa. So the question is why? Why in the world? It's not like Ethiopia was this rich nation with lots of money. The truth is, they wanted to be that great, powerful Roman Empire that they used to be back in the day when they had all of that territory. So they're trying to create that Roman Empire again. The next thing there's a map of Ethiopia there, so you can see what we're talking about. The next thing that happens is in 1937, the Japanese invade Asia. In particular, you see they go up here into Manchuria and into China. Now, the question is why? So let's think logically. If you lived in Japan, which is an island, why would you want to invade China? Number one, for land. Remember that Japan is a populated country. There's really nowhere to grow except up because it is a small territory. So they wanted land. And of course, they also needed oil. Remember, this isn't World War I anymore. This is World War II, where we are relying on gasoline and oil for tanks and planes and jeeps and all of those things. So they needed that oil. Then we see Germany invading the Rhineland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and then Poland. Now, if you remember from World War I, you can tell me why Hitler invaded those countries. Do you remember? What did we do to Germany after World War I? We punished them for not being able to make payments, right? And every time they couldn't make that millions of dollar payment, we took a piece of land from them. And so Hitler believes, I'm just taking back the land that was originally ours. And he actually wanted to be like Charlemagne, if you wanted to know the truth. He looked up to Charlemagne, who owned the whole Holy Roman Empire, if you remember that from world history. Now, how does that get us involved? Well, here's the thing. We are allies with China at the time, and we tell Japan to get out of China. And Japan says no. And so what do? We actually blockaded their oil trade, surrounded Japan, the whole island, and Japan had to make a choice. They knew they were going to run out of oil within a few months, so they either could do what we said and get out of China, or they were going to run out and basically have to surrender. So the next option was to attack first and get first strike. And that's exactly what they did. Where did they attack? If you said Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, you are correct. And that's why they attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, one of the words you hear about a lot in the news at this time is the word appeasement. Appeasement is like when you were a little kid and you were at the grocery store and you're like begging and crying for your mom to give you a pack of gum as you're checking out, right? And she's like, oh, Johnny, all right, I'll give you that pack of gum this time, but just don't do it again. That's appeasement. As a mother, I'm appeasing you because you're whining and crying. Okay. Well, especially England was accused of appeasement because when Hitler went into Czechoslovakia, the Allies did nothing. We just let them have it. But England said publicly, all right, Hitler, you can have Czechoslovakia, but if you do it again, we're going to have to take action. And that's why when they actually go into Poland, then England takes action and says, we've got to stop them from doing this. So let's look at our big three on both sides. All right, so on the Axis powers, we have Germany, who's run by Hitler, of course. Italy, ruled by Mussolini. He's a bald guy. You'll see him in a lot of cartoons with a bald head. And then Japan with Hirohito. On the Allied side, we have Great Britain, run by Winston Churchill, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, and of course the United States, led by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now remember that there are tons and tons of other countries fighting, but these were kind of the big three when we talk about the big three in the war. Now I'm going to tell you a little trick that helped me remember these for my test in college, because I was being tested over World War I, World War II, and all of it combined. So here's the way that I remember it. I look at the word Axis, and if you see an X on a bottle underneath the sink, what does it mean? It means bad or poison. So the way that I remembered it was the Axis were the bad guys. They were opposite of us. So look for the X and think the bad guys. Okay? Just a little trick. All right, one of our first events is the ABC-1 staff agreement. And I'll just give you like the who, what, why, when, where, how kind of a thing. This took place in Washington, D.C. in March of 1941. And this is even before Pearl Harbor. Remember, at this point, Winston Churchill is honestly begging the United States to get involved. And they're in trouble over in Europe. And this is what happens. Who met? The U.S. met with Great Britain, France, and Canada. And you see their leaders meeting right here. The purpose was to start planning for war and to talk with the Allies on how to fight Germany. That's the plan. So what happened? Number one, we said that the main American military effort would be in the Atlantic against Germany first. That was our first priority. Remember, we haven't been attacked by Japan yet, so that's not even in the forethought right now. Secondly, I'm going to move that over. The U.S. plans to be on the defensive against Asia. So like we said, we're going to blockade around Japan, and hopefully they'll back out of China and Manchuria. And then, lo and behold, kaboom. Guess what happens? Pearl Harbor is attacked. December 7th, 1941. Now, just a reminder, we'll talk about it a little bit more in our Pearl Harbor notes, but the Japanese not only attacked Pearl Harbor, but they attacked the Aleutian Islands, which is attached to Alaska. And they also basically took over all of the islands on the western half of the Pacific Ocean. So they really are controlling the Pacific in general. It was a very coordinated attack. As a result of that, the next day, the U.S. declares war on Japan. But then, guess what? On the same day, Hitler declares war on the U.S. So we are now committed to a two-front war. Well, actually more than two fronts, but we're fighting in Europe and we're fighting against the Japanese in the Pacific. And I'll tell you what, at this point, we're going to stop and we're going to do some notes on Pearl Harbor. So look for those separately. We'll see you on the next set of notes. Bye-bye.